Small business war stories. Small businesses are the soul of America. And this is where they tell their stories. I am your host, Pablo Fuentes. Hey, lovers of small businesses and good stories in general. Welcome to episode 109 of Small Business War Stories. And today we're a little bit of on a tactical kick. So last week we talked to Mercer about how to measure your marketing. And then today we talked to Casey Carroll about how to do Facebook advertising for your small business. So here's the deal. I've spent a lot of time going around the country, 10,000 miles, 12,000 miles covered, talking to people about their businesses. And a lot of times, a big part of what is a challenge for people is acquiring new customers, right? Some businesses are amazing at referrals, but when it comes to acquiring new customers, that's always been something that comes up in the podcast. And I shouldn't say always, many times. So I'm spending a couple of weeks talking to people who are experts at this stuff. Now, they're experts at it these are, ultra ninja warriors of the, advertising marketing world. And in these conversations, what we're trying to do is bring it back to, okay, if you are not advanced at this, how do you get started? Because a lot of times the mental barrier to get started with these things is overwhelming. It certainly has been for me with a lot of things, and you have to kind of push yourself over this, that mental barrier of I can do this. So a lot of these conversations, that's what I'm trying to do is get things down to their simple essence so that they seem addressable, because they are addressable. And you became amazing at your business by doing things well and by learning. And, before you started doing whatever you're doing today, you were not good at it because you didn't know it. And now you are. And I'm just trying to bring these things to the same level. You can also become great at digital marketing, at Facebook advertising, because this is the way that small business is going in the future. And being good at this is going to be important for you. So today with Casey, we talked about Facebook advertising and break it down to a very simple formula where at the end of the episodes, we have 6 steps that we go through for you to get started tactically, practically, a specific step-by-step guide for you to get started with Facebook advertising. This episode is brought to you by Proven. Proven is a company I started. It is a small business hiring tool. So go check it out at proven.com. And without further ado, let's get into today's episode. And by the way, this one was remote. I'm in Austin, and Casey is in Vancouver, Washington, a suburb of Portland. Let's get into today's episode with Casey Carroll of Action Advertising Agency. And we are live here. And today I have the pleasure and honor to sit down with Casey Carroll of Action Advertising Agency. And Casey's joining me remotely today from Vancouver, Washington, which is really a suburb of Portland, Oregon. But as we were talking before we started rolling tape here, when you say Vancouver, most people think Canada. So you are in actually Oregon/Washington. And welcome to the show, Casey.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being here today, Pablo.
And what's really compelling about you, so you run this advertising agency called Action Advertising Agency. Yep. And your specialty is Facebook advertising, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And what I think is really interesting is you work with a lot of folks. I'd love to hear the kinds of customers you have because you work with people who run small businesses to help them effectively use Facebook as a platform.
Correct. Yeah. So most of my clients now range between dentists, orthodontists, chiropractors, people who are more in specialty medical niches that always constantly need to find new patient volume. I also work with some auto dealers, and I do some process and sales consulting as well, depending on the niche. But besides that, I also have done some e-commerce. I've also worked with some like gyms, yoga studios. I've done a few campaigns for adventure type groups and stuff, trying to get new people to want to go snowshoeing or extreme snowboarding and stuff. So there's a lot of use cases for the kind of clients that I've actually worked with, and other small businesses who might also be looking for advertising services to grow their business.
Very cool. Very cool. So yeah, the interesting, we'll get into, I want our audience to get a lot of really actionable tactical advice, because all these things can seem a little bit overwhelming when you first dig into them, as I'm sure you've seen. But I'd like to know a little bit more about your story. What inspired you to start your business?
You know, to be really honest, I kind of stumbled across this. So I have a degree in marketing, and I also have a professional sales certificate I got from Washington State University. And right out of college, I knew immediately right off the bat that having to work for someone else, especially graduating around the Great Recession at the time, I absolutely loathed Mondays, and I loathed waking up every single day feeling like someone else was holding my financial future hostage. And I got sick and tired of having managers that, in my opinion, were not really that great, or they were not that, not what I was looking for. So I made the decision to, at one point, take a voluntary demotion. I started real estate flipping. And after doing that in the very beginning, I lost 40 grand. I was completely broken in debt. And I took a voluntary demotion, selling, business sales solutions for Verizon at one point, and then went to retail. And then after that, I trudged forward 2.5 years later. I actually started flipping houses, did that virtually. And I also was a partner at a creative agency at the time as well. But I got to the point where that business model was not working anymore. So I stumbled across an ad of someone teaching people how to run Facebook ads. And the rest is kind of history. This was around the middle of 2016, and started and kind of grew from there.
So that's pretty meta. You saw an ad on Facebook about somebody teaching people how to do Facebook advertising, and now you do that?
Crazy, right? A Facebook ad for people, teaching how to do Facebook. Yeah. So I got started with, I saw an ad in my feed, and at the time, I was a real estate flipper, right? So when I was doing that, you kind of need to have motivated sellers. And back in 2016, I was virtual flipping in 10 different states. And at the time, a lot of my deal flow had actually dried up, because when there's multiple asking prices, multiple offers on a property, most people are not willing to sell to a real estate wholesaler like I was, or be willing to do creative finance structure like I was doing at the time. So I was kind of forced to say, okay, what do I want to do with my life? I'm 31 years old at the time, and I decided to completely reinvent myself. And I said, either I'm going to become a realtor because it seemed like a good idea at the time, or I'm going to go back and get my MBA and work for the man again, which I really didn't want to do, or I just stumbled across this ad. I didn't place a lot of emphasis in the very beginning, but the more that I dived into it, the more I realized that advertising is merely just understanding from a very high level what your ideal audience is looking for, and figuring out a way to monetize that within your business. And not to mention too, in good markets and bad markets, you need advertising. So I realized I had a pretty good skill set that was perfect for running an advertising agency. And that's when I explored that. Failed pretty miserably in the very beginning, but once I learned from my lessons, I actually did very well, and it's been a wonderful ride ever since.
What were some of the mistakes you made initially when you started this? You said, actually, I think that's pretty, I would say, a common theme amongst people who start businesses. You make a lot of mistakes.
We can't talk. You can't have a podcast about war stories if we don't talk about war stories, right?
Exactly.
So, what's really funny? I hear this a lot, and I'm in a B2B niche right now as well, but I think this also applies to a lot of businesses out there who are also going direct to consumer too. There is such a thing as the wrong customer. And one thing I learned in the very beginning, again, the hard way, was I started taking on basically anyone who was willing to run ads with me. And what I did is I had very successful campaigns. I actually ran a campaign for a high altitude training gym kind of thing, where you can train like you're like at Everest and whatever. So there was all these campaigns I was creating in the very beginning, which is how I got a pretty large breadth of experience. But I realized that these customers were just not going to be the right fit. And everyone told me there's certain things you need to look for when you're looking for, bringing on clients. At the time, I'm totally green, and I'm willing to basically do whatever I can because I needed to get experience so I could grow my business from there. And then also kind of figure out what kind of clients I actually want to work with. But I wasted an enormous amount of time working with clients who really were not ready for advertising. They may think that they're ready for it, but they really weren't. And so
hold on. Let's before we move on from that, if you are running a small business, like a lot of our audience is or is thinking about doing, when do you know and how do you know whether you are ready for advertising? That's a really, really important question.
It's fantastic question. And I think it really depends on the niche too. So as it relates to a lot of newer businesses, I've learned that if you've been in business for maybe 5 years or so or less, you're probably not going to be the best fit for paid advertising. So when I look at paid traffic or paid marketing in general, and that includes, I'll include Groupon in there because I mean, you're giving discounts for Groupon to make that sort of stuff work as well. And a lot of those scenarios, it's not the right timing specifically in the very beginning because cash flow issues can be a big problem. And if you're looking at staring down the barrel of, I've got all this overhead, I've got all these employees, and I need to find a way to bring new customers in my business. In the very beginning, if you've got cash flow related issues, the majority of businesses fail within 5 years, and so because of that, if you make it past 5 years, then you can look at advertising as a way to scale your money and use money as arbitrage to create new customers versus time. And in the very beginning, I know a lot of business
so that's a lot of, let's unpack that a little bit.
Yeah.
So you just threw out the word arbitrage, which is a pretty intense term. We can talk about what that means, but let's talk.
Yes.
And you also said there was kind of an implication there that unless you've been running your business for 5 years, is that what's your litmus test? I mean, because I do know some people who have been running their business for less than 5 years who have been successful with advertising. So what is really when you look at a business and figure out whether they're a good fit, like what are the real markers that you look for?
So obviously, when it comes to dentists and chiropractors, it's a little bit different because a lot of these guys, especially if they're getting out of dental school or medical school, there's a lot of debt, and they don't really necessarily teach you how to run a business too. So cash flow does become a bit of a problem in some of those businesses. Now, some of the other businesses you mentioned, which been less than 5 years and they're fantastic, those exist too. And I think it's also very niche specific. But from my perspective, I think a lot of businesses who think about advertising as like a golden goose, like a golden hen that just, prints money for you. If you've got the right sales process and you've got the ability to leverage money versus time to find new customers, that's where advertising is a good fit. But also, keep in mind, especially in a lot of businesses who may have been used to acquiring customers a certain way or even patients a certain way, oftentimes if they're used to getting referrals and things of that nature, the entire sales process is very, very different. And so you have to understand, especially when it comes down to how you sell right now and how you get new customers right now, that when it comes to cold traffic, and when it comes to a lot of advertising related activities, it becomes a numbers game. And you have to focus a lot more so on the average lifetime value and improving a lot of the conversions end of the process more so than just advertising for that matter.
Okay, I think that, I mean, I understand what you're saying. I think that, but there's a lot there. So why don't we maybe use a couple of examples? So can you tell me about an example of somebody, you don't have to name names, that's somebody who was not a good fit for advertising and why that was, and then somebody who was a very good fit for Facebook advertising and why that was?
Yes. Okay. So good question. So one of the very first companies I ever worked with was a local yoga studio. And with this local yoga studio, I actually walked in and I said, look, I want to create some campaigns. I'm willing to do it for free. I just want to get some experience. And hey, if you like what you see, then maybe we can talk afterwards and I can do this for you on a monthly basis. And so we started running some campaigns and we had a test budget of like $100, $200 or something like that. And then within that $100 to $200, she had gotten something like, I think it was like 30 or 40 leads with that money. And it was like $5 to $10 a lead. I can't remember exactly what the numbers were at the time, but she got like, 20, 30 leads or so. And with all these leads that have come in, she didn't follow the process that I said, which was you got to call these guys and make sure that you get at least 50% of these people in the business and such. She didn't do the process that I kind of outlined that she needed to see to make sure that she was going to have a positive return on investment from her advertising, and so after doing that a little bit, she said, look, I have a bunch of people starting, but I'm not getting all this revenue right now. And so therefore, I really can't do this anymore. By the way, also, Facebook just billed me another $50 because I accidentally went past the $150 or $200 or whatever it was. And I'm going to need to get that $50 back. So if you're a business that's fretting over something as small as $50 being spent on an advertising campaign test, you're probably not in the right fit. But
okay. Now, let's make a quick distinction. So you mentioned that she wasn't following up with the prospects, but that's a different issue than the business being ready for advertising, right? Because
not necessarily. In fact, now it depends. Now, when it comes to local lead generation, in fact, in my experience, I've lost customers because they were not willing to follow the process. Mm-hmm. So when it comes down to the new customer acquisition game, it's equal part traffic but it's also equal part conversion. So I can't tell you, and I'm sure there's a lot of people listening that have had the same experience too. I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say the lead quality is poor, the leads are crap, the leads are garbage, and all these other things. And the reality is, I think sometimes there's a misalignment with the expectation of what advertising is going to bring to you versus the requirement of having to use advertising as a way with a process attached to it in order to ensure that all parts of this entire, sales ecosystem increase the overall growth and goals of the business, which is profit, growth, revenue, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So really, when it comes down to advertising and sales process, okay, both truly do go hand in hand. If you don't have process, advertising is a waste of money.
Okay, so what you're saying is that if you're not ready, what I'm hearing is that if as a business owner you're not ready to have a process where you follow up on these leads and you are really capitalizing on that, then any money or time you spend on advertising is probably going to be wasted until you have that.
1,000% yes. In fact, I can tell you right now that, like, for example, one of the very first chiropractor I ever worked with, I was still kind of green at the time, so I didn't know what I didn't know at the time. But when we first started working together, he was around $30,000 to $40,000 a month in revenue. And I've got a video testimonial actually that he talked about this, which is kind of cool. But he was about $30,000 to $40,000 a month in revenue, which is pretty good for most chiropractors. And over the last 2 years, he's now averaging about $120,000 a month, and he's done less outside marketing and advertising. But in the very first month, I filmed a testimonial video with this doctor, and I came in there thinking everything was great. Hey, we got 184 leads. Hey, we got all this stuff. And he came back and said, I can't get a hold of most of these people. Most of these people are not showing up to their second appointment. I'm struggling to get them to convert at scale. I'm getting a lot of no-call, no-shows, and all these things are causing all these problems. So I've experienced a lot of scenarios where, especially like with local lead generation, not necessarily e-commerce, where if you were to all of a sudden jam-pack this schedule where there's a finite number of appointments that a doctor has available in a day with a bunch of people, and yet if you don't have a good appointment reminder process, your no-call, no-shows will skyrocket. And suddenly now we're having a completely different discussion about opportunity costs being a huge problem, which is really weighing down the advertising return on investment too. So that's kind of one scenario where the numbers were great, and yet in the very beginning he struggled, and it took about 2 to 3 months of us working together. And he also hired some professional chiropractic coaches that showed him how to do certain processes in his business, how to organize his business to be able to take advantage of cold traffic at scale, so that you can build into an automated sales machine, more or less, where Facebook is kind of like the conduit that feeds that raw material into the machine, but Facebook is never going to be what creates that final product too.
Makes sense. So you want to have it. What I'm hearing then is that for you to be ready for advertising, you have to have your product or service really nailed down, and you also have to have a good sense of what your process is going to be for following up with the leads, so that you can best utilize advertising and not waste. Because you could generate 100 leads a day, but if you don't have the right processes, it's all going to fall through the cracks.
Yes, absolutely. And not to mention, too, going back to the misalignment with expectations, there's a lot of advertising agencies out there that promote low-cost leads or cheap leads, if you will. Like, hey, we sent 1,000 leads last month to this particular client. Well, how many of them converted? Well, who cares? I mean, so there's been some scenarios with some of the other doctors I've worked with as well, where cheap leads brought them, they just were not equipped to handle that at scale with 5 or 6 different locations, with every doctor having a different sales style. So what we did was we added additional friction to the overall advertising process, started making it more challenging to actually become a lead, making them go through more hoops and hurdles to eventually become a lead, playing around with the pricing structure, et cetera, the offer. All those things we started playing with to try to enhance the quality of lead from their perspective. And what happened was the cost per lead actually went up like 5 times more. It was a significantly higher cost per lead, which in most scenarios, most other advertising agencies that are playing in the same space that I do would just lose their mind over something like that, because they're always promoting so many leads at such a cheap price. And if you're paying 5 times more, you would just lose your mind. But in this scenario, the doctor could not close 200 leads that were at $5 to $10 each. He was happier with 50 leads at $50 to $100 each. because he was able to convert a larger percentage of those with across all 5 different locations that they have. And on top of that, the overall return on investment increased, even though the cost per lead also increased by 5 times versus where it was before with cheap leads.
Sounds good. Okay, so let's say that you feel as a small business that you're ready for advertising. Now, there's probably a place for Facebook advertising if you're just getting started out, just to test the market for things, right? That's probably a different use case.
Oh, no, totally. I mean, so I test new stuff. In fact, advertising is all about testing, testing, testing. You have to test different offers, different creative. But the beauty of the Facebook platform is that it gives you the ability to test in controlled spaces. So your overall cost to test to see if something's going to work is significantly less than the barrier to entry if you were to go with print or radio or billboards, right, where they require, a certain minimum amount of investment. With Facebook, you could test as little as like $30 to $100, and you'll know, do I have a good lead generation source here? Mm-hmm. And then the next step is, okay, well, can I convert this lead generation source into people that are walking into my business? And there's a lot of psychological stuff that happens in between too that you can test out. Hey, let's test out, a discount on this price. Hey, now let's test out, figuring out how we can promote the experience versus the sale and see if that does a better job of getting butts in seats or getting people to walk in my business. Okay. So from a testing perspective, can you test with low dollar amounts? Yeah. I mean, one of my mentors actually recommends a $1 a day strategy, for example, which you can truly do over time. But with all the data that you get, click-through rates, you can dive down into genders, placements, what age groups are responding, where were your leads coming from, at which specific age group, at what time of the day, on what device. So you can get really hyper granular into the weeds if you really wanted to, and only still have to spend maybe $50 to $100 to do it if you wanted to test it.
Okay, very cool. So we've talked about when your business is or isn't ready, and when it's a good idea to double down when you're ready to actually capitalize on those leads. But let's get really tactical here. So if you're a business that has done little to no Facebook advertising so far, how should they start? And obviously, it's one thing to go with you're an agency and you do things for people. But let's say that a small business does not have the budget for an agency, but they do think that Facebook advertising is important. So what are the things that they can do to get started?
I know this is going to sound absolutely crazy that I'm saying this, but I think the first thing you need to do is you need to define what your goal is, what's your outcome that you're expecting out of Facebook advertising. And when you look at that outcome, let's say, for example, like if you're a doctor, you're saying, hey, I have 150 patient visits per week. By this time next year, I would like to be at 300 visits per week. If you have other avenues that you can honestly tell yourself that you can get there, then do that instead. So in other words, what I'm saying is, in some scenarios, I might say, look, as a marketing purist, I look at Facebook as a tool, but I'm not going to sell you on Facebook advertising if it doesn't really necessarily make sense. I think if anything, Facebook should be a component of a comprehensive marketing platform. So if you've got other things you do, for example, like podcast interviewing, that is one marketing avenue. And so if you can still hit your outcome that you're expecting or your goals without needing to add anything else other than what you're doing right now, but maybe scaling that. Maybe it's, patient appreciation days. Maybe it's, I'm going to go to the county fair and sell my product, or whatever that might look like. If you can scale that and you've exhausted your alternatives and you have a certain process that you like to do in order to achieve the outcome that you're wanting to hit a year from now, and you can honestly do it with that, I'd say do that first. Where Facebook and Google AdWords and YouTube and Snapchat advertising and Waze advertising, and I can go down the list, where a lot of those other digital tools come into play that can be beneficial is where you've exhausted your other alternatives to hit an outcome that you're trying to hit, or a goal you're trying to hit, and you have the ability to trade money for new customers, and you're looking to automate and systemize and scale past a certain point. Everyone has a point in their business where they plateau. So if you're plateauing with your marketing plan and you've got money to invest into something like this, that's where, take a look at Google, take a look at Facebook. And then as you're looking down this path, you have to start first with the goal that you're trying to hit. If your goal is, I want to hit, I just want more business. Well, who cares? I mean, that doesn't mean anything, right? Like, you've got to be very specific about what you're actually trying to accomplish.
Okay, so what are ways to do that? Because let's just say that What's the first step in that? Because that in itself can almost be overwhelming, right? And it's like, oh, I don't exactly know what I need to do, and I just want more, and I'm overwhelmed. I don't know
Yes.
what's a good process to follow to figure the answer to that question.
The funny thing is, this is almost actually away from even talking about advertising, but it's the truth too. I mean, all businesses need to do this first. You need to have a clear definition on what your goal is in any way, shape, or form. And if you can't figure out what that goal is, and they've got to be smart goals too, right? So smart, sizable, measurable, attainable, realistic, time based. If you don't have a smart goal that you're trying to hit, and if you've looked at what you've done to get to your business to where it is so far right now, we're not talking necessarily startups. We're talking like a business that has already gotten to a certain point and they're looking to grow and they don't have alternatives. You have to attach that first, like I said, to a SMART goal first. But I think the first thing you need to do is take a look at your business and say, what do I want my business to look like? I'm in the business, by the way, I know it sounds crazy, but I'm in the business of selling an outcome. I'm not in the business of selling quote unquote advertising. And so because of that, I think being brutally honest with yourself about what you're actually trying to accomplish with advertising and figuring out what platform makes the most sense. For example, like with Facebook, going back to what we were talking about before, Facebook is not necessarily great at finding intent. So let's say, for example, if you've gotten in a DUI and you just are looking for a DUI attorney, well, Facebook is probably not going to be the best way of trying to find a DUI attorney if you're scrolling through your feed and all of a sudden you see that. Because if it was last night, you've got a certain amount of time and you need to find intent. And that's where something like Google AdWords probably makes a little bit more sense first. So starting first with a goal, number one, and it's got to be a SMART goal, and really like not even moving forward until you get to there. If you need to lock yourself in a dark room and just meditate for 5 hours before you figure out what that goal is, that's the first step, right? And then from there, looking at, okay, well, now that I figured out my outcome that I'm looking for, my goal that I'm looking for, what is the best platform to do that sort of stuff? And that's where you have to look at the limitations of Facebook and Instagram versus YouTube and Google. Some keywords.
How do you think about that? Yeah. I mean, if I'm a business that's never done any online advertising or maybe some dabbled but not really succeeded, how do I think about which platform to go with?
I would say something like this. If it requires an event or it's a time-based element that requires something else to happen before your ideal customer comes in, for example, like divorce attorneys, there's a couple different ways you could go about that. Number one, you could create a Google AdWords campaign for, hey, been in a divorce and you don't want to lose half your house, give me a call, I'll help you, or something like that. And when that person goes to the landing page, with all digital advertising out there, they have something called a pixel. And here's what the pixel is. The pixel, whether it's Google or Facebook, everyone has a different pixel. And what it does is it tracks you. And it also allows you to analyze behavioral information on the ad platform itself, on the kinds of people who have gone to my landing page once they clicked on that Google AdWords campaign, And what you can do in this case, if it requires a time-based element, is you can either just strictly go to Google, or what you can do is you can do a duo.
Okay, but hold on, before you move on to that, so can you explain the pixel again? In a very, I guess, stripped down manner. What is a pixel and how do you use a pixel?
Well, let me ask you this. So when you go to a website, have you ever had a scenario where you went to a website and you were scrolling through that website and then all of a sudden you go on Facebook and you start seeing ads from that website?
Yes.
So that is called a remarketing tag on the Facebook pixel.
Okay.
And the pixel basically is a little piece of code that the moment you go to that particular website or whatever, that pixel is tracking your movement on that site. It can track at what point you left that site, or did you become a lead on that site? And if you went to that site and did not become a lead or did not buy a product, then suddenly you can build an audience of people who are Facebook profile users who went to that specific site with that pixel attached to it, that visited a certain URL on that website, but did not purchase, did not become a lead, and therefore you can create a targeted ad campaign on Facebook to those individuals.
Okay. So to be clear, before you even keep going with that, so I mean I understand where a pixel is. I just want to make sure that we really strip this down to its very essential core. So if you want to run a pixel-based Facebook campaign, which really is what you're saying, which is tracking audience that comes to your site and then targeting them on Facebook, the first thing you have to do is actually either if you develop your own site, do it yourself, or if you're working with somebody who's helping you with your website, you have to insert that code into your own website.
Correct.
Okay, so that's an important part, right? Because a lot of times it's almost like it's an installation that needs to happen. It's not about just going to Facebook and start running campaigns. If you want to be really effective at this, part of the, I guess, pre-work that you have to do has to do with inserting this code into your own website so that you can do this.
Totally. And then, well, let me tell you this. If you do not have a Facebook pixel, or if you're running a Google AdWords campaign, if you don't have a Google remarketing pixel or conversion tag or whatever on your landing page or your website, it's literally like you're trying to run the Indy 500 with blindfolds on. It's not, you're truly running blind, because there's a lot of, and I'm going to try to not get too deep into what the pixel does, because the pixel does far more actually than just remarketing. So the Facebook pixel can also track how many leads came from certain ad sets or campaigns directly from your ads manager view as well. So for example, here's what I mean by that. On a lot of the landing page type ads that I create, I will put the code on the thank you pages. So basically a thank you page would be, if you go to a website, you fill out a form, I'm interested, I want to take advantage of this offer. It'll then usually take you to a thank you page. On that thank you page, that pixel now has a tiny little additional piece of code called an event. And that event is called a lead. And then therefore, when I look into my ads manager view, I can see and drive down into which ad sets drove leads, what was the cost per lead. So if you're running a lot of tests, let's say that you're doing men and women separately, you're doing 5-year increments, you might have like 10 or 12 different ad sets, all running to the same exact landing page. If you want to know which ad set, maybe it's men 50 through 55 or whatever, if they go to that website, the same exact website where that pixel is located on, and they make it to that final thank you page where suddenly that lead event code fired to that profile, now you know exactly which ad set on which campaign actually drove that lead and what was the cost.
Now that's that's a pretty advanced set of tactics, right? If you're running 12 segments on a campaign, you probably have a dedicated person running this. Like if you're a small business person, if you're a small business person running their first campaign, that is not where you start, right? That's actually would be so overwhelming that it would likely, almost certainly, lead to failure.
Well, yeah, no, you're totally right. And I forget, this is we're talking in the context of newer people who've never entered the platform before. There's Facebook Blueprint, which is available if you want to look into how to run certain types of campaigns. I will tell you that there's a lot of nuance to the platform that I'm in Ads Manager every single day. I've also helped the Facebook ads team with refining the ad manager platform products, event managers, offline event data, all sorts of different stuff. I'm part of a panel, and so I help them also improve their tools for other advertisers like me. But there's still stuff that I learned too. Now, can you start and be deadly? Yeah, you probably could. You can go down the path of going through the Blueprint program, which is free.
Yeah. So what is Facebook Blueprint?
So Facebook Blueprint is it's like a little university that Facebook itself has created to teach people how to do certain things with the ads platform. So they're free classes you can take directly from Facebook, and you can have enough to probably be semi-dangerous. But in order to truly be to the point where, like some of the advanced stuff that you and I were talking about, which I barely scratched the surface. There's so much more that, of course, I could probably talk all day about that, but I won't because I don't want to lose anyone here. But if you wanted to just have enough to be dangerous, to create your own first campaign and not necessarily hire an expensive agency like me to do it, Facebook Blueprint is a free resource that Facebook gives to anyone that is looking to actually advertise on the platform, and will give you enough information to be dangerous.
Okay, that's incredibly valuable. Okay, so Facebook Blueprint. So I'm keeping notes here. So the first number one step, if you're a small business that's looking to get into Facebook advertising, is determine, are you ready, right?
Yep.
Then your number two step, if you determine that you are ready, is you want to set up your goals to make sure, what is it that you want to get out of this, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Then your number three thing you need to do is you need to do the pre-work, and you need to pre-wire things. So put the Facebook pixel onto your website so you have something to ping back for the campaign, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Then number four, you want to go learn about what you're doing, so you can go into Facebook Blueprint and look at some of these classes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And once you go through that process too, it'll guide you through the steps on how to create an ad account, how to set up a campaign, what kind of campaign objective would you like to start with?
Okay.
What kind of targeting options do you want to use? Facebook also has other deeper algorithmic targeting stuff that I won't really dive a whole lot into because I could probably jabber all day about it. But I will tell you this: Facebook collects 17,000 different data points on us right now. And I'll just from really briefly, I'll kind of talk about this and hopefully I don't lose anyone in the process. But again, going back to that pixel, the importance of that pixel. Another thing that I have also done, once you get past the step of I've created a campaign, etc. Now I'm trying to figure out my targeting options. You've exhausted interest-based targeting on Facebook where there's a whole bunch of interests you can select. If you are a guitar manufacturer and you want to go after people who might like the Gibson Guitar Company, you can have that as an option. But you can also take it one step further once you get a little bit more advanced, which is you can actually have Facebook analyze every single person who has made it to the thank you page on that landing page or made it to the checkout cart page on the e-commerce page and bought something from you. And what you can do is you can have Facebook turn all of those 50 to 100 or whatever leads, purchases, etc. You can have them turn into an advertising algorithm, which then what Facebook will do is will mathematically look at every single one of those 50 to 100 people that made it to that thank you page or that checkout card page. And then you can actually use that as your targeting objective on Facebook and say, Facebook, I want you to find more people that mathematically and algorithmically with all the 17,000 different data points that you track on every single one of your users, I want you to find more people just like the people who made it to that thank you page. And I'm going to use that for my targeting moving forward, and the cost per lead will go down.
That would be a custom audience, right?
No, that's a conversion-based campaign using an event code as the objective of what you're trying to accomplish.
Got it. I understand.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but that's actually even more advanced stuff, right? I mean, I think that's something that, even in the best possible scenario, if you're starting to deal with Facebook advertising,
that's an agency type thing.
Yeah, that's probably not something you would do on your own at first.
It would be hard. You would have to really be like a bona fide expert, in your own regard. And I hate using the word expert because I feel like it's just so cliche. Like I don't even like calling myself an expert. And for all intents and purposes, you probably could say that. But for me, I think if you want to just keep it simple, there's a lot of ways you can keep it simple. Okay. If you want to refine it so you can make it incrementally better and improve results over time, and then use a lot of the rich data that you get from Facebook to make more informed business decisions. Here's a use case, just real quick. I won't talk about offline events a whole lot because I could really, again, go deep into that. But with offline events, I use that to track people who have seen or clicked on my automotive ads. And oftentimes not everyone goes and becomes a lead on an automotive website. But because of this information, I can tell that in certain areas, for example, I know that certain people have seen or clicked on my ad, and then within 28 days, they walked into a dealership or they became a lead on the website. And after that, they bought a vehicle, and I know exactly what the profit was on that vehicle, and I can match that up with offline events to see which ad set drove that walk-in purchase.
Yeah.
So it's crazy.
But that's some pretty advanced ninja stuff. You're talking about like, those kung fu movies. You're talking about floating and having a conical hat. I'm talking about wax on, wax off.
Exactly. That's like 10 steps further. But I've got some use cases where because of that, I have a couple of automotive dealers that spent $100,000 last year, and they have $1.2 million in profit, not revenue, but actual profit that I can track down to the ad, which ad drove that profit and how much was.
Okay, that's really powerful stuff. Let's talk about, you remember that Chappelle segment where it's like, when keeping it real goes wrong. Let's talk about when Facebook advertising goes wrong. What are some of the things that can go south? What are some pitfalls to avoid?
Oh man, so I'll talk first, I think, a little bit about algorithm changes, because a lot of the advertising agencies like myself, will oftentimes use conversion campaigns, lead objective campaigns, and event-based campaigns to find our ideal audience to serve ads to. So in about maybe 4 or 5 times a year, when Facebook is making changes to the platform, or when Facebook is changing the algorithm of how a lot of their audiences are used and stuff, you'll never know when it's happening. But all of a sudden, practically 1 month, your cost per lead or your cost per purchase will be X. Then the next month, it's truly like it increased by a factor of 2 to 3 times more expensive. And it's out of nowhere. And you're like, whoa, wait a minute. My cost per lead was like $10. Now it's $30 a lead, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So you look at yourself and you're scratching your head going, where did I go wrong here? And you might think to yourself, hey, maybe it's ad fatigue. Maybe I've been showing the same ad to the same audience for too long. And now cost per lead rose dramatically like that. Usually what's actually happening is Facebook is changing their targeting algorithm. So all the quote unquote ninja guys like me who use conversion campaigns to find audiences suddenly will be dealing with a cost per lead where it's 2 to 3 times more expensive. And it's nothing that we did on our end. And if we change creative, nothing changes. It's truly just, unfortunately, there are these times of the year where for some reason Facebook just completely goes haywire, and the only thing you can do is brace for yourself and hopefully not drown in the process.
Okay. But that's more akin to the weather changing. I'm talking about so that's not a mistake, right? That's not a truly going wrong in the sense of what I'm asking. Like yeah, sure. The weather changes. You gotta, adapt to the weather and learn how to, navigate the new waters. I get that. Yeah. But what are some things like real pitfalls and mistakes and things that can really cost people that are good to avoid?
Oh, gotcha. Okay. So tactically, as it relates to the platform, we could talk about a lot of different things that could. So for example, a lot of people don't understand the mechanics of persuasive advertising, or they don't understand why people buy or why they don't buy. So there's a lot of ways you can lose a ton of money on Facebook by running campaigns that just are not congruent with the ideal audience that you're looking for. And I will tell you this, in my experience, you will lose far more money on your campaigns if your offer sucks. And the offer could be a million different things. It could be, you want to do a free promotion for this or that. But if you don't run the right offer, you can waste thousands upon thousands of dollars on Facebook and not have a single lead to show for it. In fact, here's a story. I spoke with a prospect like about a year or so ago now at this point. It was a while. He went with a large advertising agency because, hey, it's a large agency and they work with chiropractors, and therefore, he's going to get me all these stem cell patients. But the prospect was not willing to run a good offer, and the very large agency, quote unquote, didn't have a good solid account manager that was really helping them. So they spent, I think, he told me he spent like $7,000 or $8,000 on credit cards over the course of like his 4 or 5 month contract, and got, I think, something like 10 to 12 leads. Wow. So the cost per lead was outrageously high. He was locked in contract with this very large agency. And also, going back to what I was saying earlier, because his processes were not good, about how things are done in his office, he ended up not converting a single one of those patients into paying patients. So you can lose an enormous amount of money if you don't look at advertising from the perspective of your audience. You look at it from your own perspective. I want to make money. I want to do this. Well, you got to try to put yourself in the shoes of other people. So as it relates to pitfalls on the platform, the Facebook platform is just purely a tool. There's a lot of ways you can manipulate it to do X, Y, Z. But I've found that most pitfalls actually end up being with an improper offer, a landing page that is not congruent with the original ad, or it's not pleasing to the people, or doesn't encourage them to do something. Sending traffic to a website with no call to action. I see that a lot. Mm-hmm. Or even sending them to a website in general. There are times where I do that, but most of the time, if I'm trying to get them to opt into a campaign, if you give them too many options to leave or abandon that website, then they're going to do it. So you can have a huge abandoned traffic rate. The quality of your traffic might look poor on Facebook, and then all of a sudden you're paying more per impression, per 1,000 impressions on Facebook, because you have a higher bounce rate on your website. So there's a number of things, not having proper offers, not giving an offer that's good to the audience, not having proper targeting. Your creative and your copy is not persuasive. It doesn't go to the right types of people. Hiring the wrong agencies. Not having the right outcomes focus. And one thing I like to talk about a lot, because if this one simple thing is not truly embodied with any client, there's really no way you're ever going to make any advertising work, period. And that is, you have to look at the average lifetime value of customers. Now, when I talk about that, there's a saying that goes in the advertising world, which is, he or she who's willing to pay more to acquire a new customer will win more customers. So when you think about it, wait a minute, my margins are X, Y, Z, there's a couple things you can do to improve that. Improving the average lifetime value by either upsells, by having a better referral retention program, a number of things like that can increase the average value of what a customer is worth to you. So now you can justify paying more to acquire a new customer in the first place if you really need to.
And you're talking about the nuts and bolts and the math of the business. And I think that's really important. That kind of goes together with what you said at the beginning of, are you ready to advertise?
Totally.
So, and one of the things too that's really important that you alluded to is getting the messaging right. We actually did I'm going to reference here another episode we did with Ryan Dice, who
Ryan Dice.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a big name. I just went to TNC too.
yeah. Actually, I was supposed to go. I couldn't make it, but so Ryan Dice was on the show. We did an episode at the Wizard Academy here in Austin, and he talked about exactly that, is how do you get your messaging right? And we talked about character diamonds. So that's a really great thing to insert here, because I'm going to go down the list of the things, the kind of checklist to start advertising on Facebook. And I think one of the really important ones is getting your messaging right. And again, this we did an episode with that again, Ryan Dice, DEISS, if you want to look it up in the history of small business war stories. But the first thing, again, we're going to go down the list. So the first one is, are you ready to advertise? Meaning, do you have the processes, and also is the lifetime value of your customer to where you can spend money to acquire those customers, right? Mm-hmm. If yes, right, the second thing that you do, well, so we talked about the pre-work and putting in the pixel, right? Yeah. But hold on, I also had another thing here. What was the second thing?
Finding the outcome of the goal that you're trying to
Right, the outcome, right, yes. Correct. So I can't even read my own handwriting. So defining the outcome and what you want to get to. If you have a good, solid outcome that is realistic with your campaign, you need to do the pre-work, which is to put in the pixel and wire things up so that you can run your Facebook campaign well. Yeah. The fourth thing is you want to go learn about how to operate the platform, and there's Facebook Blueprint that can help you with that. Actually, you might want to determine whether or not Facebook is the right platform for you. So that's kind of like another step there.
Yeah.
And then you want to get this is where we insert the episode with Ryan Dice. You want to get your messaging right so that anything that you're amplifying is the right thing to amplify. And then you can start running your campaigns and actually testing and iterating on your results. Did I miss anything there?
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to add to messaging too, by the way, which is this: keeping the average lifetime value in the picture. With most chiropractors, for example, the average patient's worth between $2,000 to $5,000, depending on what the chiropractor does and whether or not they have a great retention plan, referrals, etc. But when you look at, I've had a lot of conversations with chiropractors and doctors in general, where I will say, let's talk about the offer, and their response, and sometimes can be, well, I don't want to, quote unquote, cheapen my value or cheapen my services or run with a discounted price offer or something along those lines. That's great. If you want to run with a lead magnet, which is where you give away something in exchange for an email address and then you nurture that person over time with an email marketing campaign, for example, that's fine. Do that too. There's no real one clear way to be able to win at the quote unquote game of customer acquisition. Really, there's a lot of ways you can do it. But when you look at things like quote unquote cheapening the value, I like to bring up a story where, and a lot of us have seen this too, where I was scrolling through a newspaper one day and I saw a $1 Coke ad by McDonald's. Mm-hmm. And I know full well that to get that $1 Coke ad in that newspaper, it cost over $1 to be able to do that, right?
Right.
And so when those people walk into a McDonald's, you think to yourself, how the heck do these guys make money if they're cheapening their quote-unquote Coca-Cola by going with $1 Coke? Where do they make their money? Well, it's because when you're in there, you're going to end up buying burgers. Maybe you'll bring your kids and they'll get ice cream cones. Maybe you're hungry one day. And of course, I'm not advocating for eating McDonald's because it's not great food for you either. but maybe you're driving down one day and you're hungry and you're like, hey, you know what? My snack wrap or my salad with McDonald's at one time was really great. So you don't have to constantly pay to find that customer to come back into your business over and over again. So when it comes down to doctors, I always say, look, if we run with an offer to get people in the front door, that'll gives you a conversation and opportunity that you did not have otherwise. Yep. And so if you're breaking even to get someone in the front door, maybe you run a $19 promotion, maybe you run a $29 promotion, maybe you have a $39 or whatever that looks like, whatever the cost per lead is, it's the right kind of patient mix for you. In those scenarios, you have to remember that each one of those patients are worth $2,000 to $5,000. So if you want to sweat over potentially breaking even on that new patient special, or by even losing a little bit of money to get that person in the front door, if you're going to lose your mind over that, you have to change your perspective and say, look, I know that if I get 100 leads for this campaign in 1 month, I know that probably 50 of them are actually going to come in. Out of those 50, if my sales closing rate is as low as just 25% of those 50, I'll get 12 and a half new people to walk in my front door that will buy and become a lifetime customer out of those 100 leads. And then out of those 12 and a half, if they're simply just worth $2,000 each, that's $25,000 in revenue, lifetime revenue, yep, that you got for that very smart decision you made in month one, just like how McDonald's made that smart decision.
And that's
a Coke advertisement.
And that's, I think, a really important topic. It's an entire different podcast. I mean, I would encourage our listeners to Google Ryan Dice's again, napkin business plan, because he talks about exactly this and gives you a step-by-step approach to your referencing lead magnets, and you're referencing things like tripwires, which is again loss leaders, like the reason why Best Buy can sell you $150 flat screen TV, and to get you in the door. That's it's a much broader topic, but I appreciate you bringing it up. I think it's really important for people to think about their business that way. But you can also Google Ryan Deiss, DEISS, napkin business plan, because he goes through in very good detail about how you can think about what Casey just talked about. But let's where can people find you? What if people are interested in working with you as an agency? What are your handles, and how can people get a hold of you?
Absolutely, yeah. So my website is www.actionad.agency. Not .com, it's .agency. I know I'm just trying to be hip and trendy. People don't seem to understand that sometimes. Yep. I'm also on facebook.com/Action Ads with an S agency. Unfortunately, Action Ad Agency was taken by someone else, and I'll have to fight them to the death to get that now. Or my personal brand business Facebook page is facebook.com/Casey Carroll Live. CASEYCARROLL Live.
Sounds good. Well, Casey, thank you so much for taking the time today to go over all of this with me. I think only scratch the surface, but I think there's enough here for our listeners to go and really get started and do their own research. I mean, ultimately, this is going to be it's hard work, right? So it's like push-ups. You can't really listen to a podcast about push-ups. This is kind of I stole this from Gary Vee, but he talks about push-ups. You got to do push-ups. You can't just watch people do push-ups on Instagram and get strong. So this is the same thing. You have to go in and put in the work. But I really appreciate you spending time with us today. Small Business War Stories.
Pleasure's mine. Thank you.
Look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you.
Take care. Small Business War Stories. Small businesses are the soul of America. And this is where they tell their stories. I am your host, Pablo Fuentes.